Welcome to Stay Home, Stay Focused. I'm Jack Moline. I am president of Interfaith Alliance, and my guest today for some conversation and insight is my friend, Reverend Rob Schenck, who is the president, the founder, the CEO of the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Institute, along with a lot of other things. But let's start with the most important question, Rob. How are you and Cheryl doing?
Very good. You know, we kind of pinch ourselves, Jack, because Cheryl is a psychotherapist in private practice, and her clients have come right along with her into the virtual world, and she spends her professional hours in our home here. She has her exclusive study. We call them studies. We don't like having offices at home. Keep the offices outside.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't get to either of our offices, so she is sequestered in her study with her patients, and I'm in mine with my world and doing things like this with you and doing my regular work. And we feel privileged. Our family, all of our family members are well, thank God.
Thank God. Yep.
We have one nephew with COVID-19
Oh, good.
right now, but he's moving through it reasonably and it's not needed hospitalization. So we've only been touched in that tangential way. But I have to say, it actually, in many ways, has been an enjoyable experience for us. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that.
Maybe for those of us who have the resources to weather this without too much concern, there are certain gifts that come along with it, and we'll try to get to those. You mentioned Cheryl's work, and I know you can't speak for her, but I wonder if she shared with you if there's a qualitative difference in her conversations with her clients through a screen and when there's not a screen between them.
Most definitely. And she has felt at something of a deficit. And yet at the same time, she says that a short ways into each session, that is soon forgotten and dissolves, and they get very effective work done, and no one has registered a complaint about it. So
that's great. That's great. I think there's a lot of that going on. You and I, as we're talking like this, probably have our faces closer to each other than we've ever had in conversation, and yet it doesn't feel unnatural at all. So
that's right.
Tell us a little bit about the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Institute.
Sure. Well, it's named for the guy over my shoulder here, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a young, brilliant World War II era church leader in Germany, one of the first religious voices to raise an objection to Adolf Hitler and National Socialism. He would go on to become a voice and icon of resistance in both Germany and wider Europe. He would bring all the forces of his considerable intellect to bear in that struggle against tyranny, and would eventually lose his young life at age 39 when he was hanged at the Flossenburg concentration camp for his participation in a conspiracy to assassinate Adolf Hitler, which makes him a very interesting pacifist, which is how he defined himself.
No kidding. And why name this institute after him?
Well, his greatest contribution really was in the field of ethics. He was both an ethicist and moral philosopher, moral theologian. And so we take his insights and bring them to bear on the formation of religious leadership for now and the future. And he's been very helpful to us in these times of social crises here in this country and in other places.
See, I've never spent the time in scholarship to do a deep dive on any of the teachings of the great personalities of our culture and our civilization. I know these folks mostly through my friends like you who've done the scholarship and invested in them. What I understand from you is that, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, there are sort of four qualities that Bonhoeffer had that are attractive to us in a world today that seems afloat. He was a person of principle, he was a person of compassion, a person of faith, and a person of deep integrity. Do I have those four correct?
Yes, yes. However, I wouldn't want to leave anyone with the misimpression that he was perfect. He was far from it and very aware of it. So I would add a humble. He had humility.
Well, good. So given that we are where we are today, and let's set aside politics from any of this, what would Bonhoeffer say today about standing on principle?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, one is, of course, he was interesting in the sense that he thought you could make an idol of anything, including your principles. So in that sense, he was very flexible. You mentioned that he was compassionate. I would have described him as empathetic. He was a person of great empathy.
A better word.
He felt for others, and he was willing to adjust even his most ardent principles to accommodate empathy. He balanced it. So I would say today, we certainly need to keep our principles front and center and treasure them and not surrender them easily, but certainly modify and adapt them to real human need, which is a delicate balance. And he never mastered that, and he writes about that, but he was certainly conscious of it all through his career.
And where does faith fit in a mostly faithless world? And that I want to make clear, that's not an insult to anybody's personal convictions, but we're not a world in which faith is valued as a general operating principle.
Well, I would agree with Bonhoeffer in this, that faith, to me, is a key to hope, which is transcendent and very helpful and comforting to us. Wherever hope is generated from, I think it has its ultimate origins in God. Bonhoeffer believed that very much. So all of this is tied into the times that we're living in, and sometimes the greatest gift of faith comes to us from the atheist. So I don't exclude anyone from this. We all have a part to play in exercising faith, whether it's in humanity or ultimately in the divine.
And how about integrity?
Well, there's the great temptation is always
right. Try to resist it.
Yeah, and that is something I think we are all called to, and particularly in times of extremity, as we are in now. Exigencies often tempt us in ways that regular life doesn't. So holding on to our integrity in these times is extremely important to our survival in every way. Good.
And of course, speaking as one of the most humble people I know, what role does humility play in our society today?
Yeah. Well, we quoters of the New Testament often go to, a number of passages on that, but one would certainly be when we humble ourselves, only then are we exalted. So the one who exalts himself shall be humbled. I mean, that's an inescapable principle in the universe. And there's another passage in the New Testament we go to often. Pride goes before a fall, and a haughty spirit before destruction, which reminds us how important it is for us to humble ourselves every day and constantly. It's really the key, I think, to success.
Terrific. Thank you, Rob. That's great. I want to get to cases a little bit and ask you an impossible question, and the even more impossible task of speaking as if you could channel Dietrich Bonhoeffer. What would he do about placing a hierarchy on lives in this crisis? How would he advise people in hospitals who have to make unimaginable decisions about the suffering of the patients they're confronting?
First of all, you spoke about core principles. One of he treats in his magnum opus, ethics. So he gives us a script for it, really. and that is to treasure every human life, including potential human life. He goes into a whole treatise on that. So every human life is of ultimate value, and keeping that front and center at the same time as his involvement in the assassination plot, for example, would betray. There are sometimes very painful and impossible decisions that ultimately must be made out of responsibility, not to be justified or excused, sometimes simply to be lamented. And these are very painful, and I think we should identify with the agony of those health care providers, physicians, others, nurses, who are caught in this terrible dilemma and have to act responsibly, whether or not they like it theoretically or not. It's their reality, and we have to feel that agony with them and with all those who are at loss and suffering as a result of it. I think it calls for enormous empathy and respect for those who will have to make decisions most of us will never have to make, and we have to appreciate that.
I get generally, Rob, one or two money quotes in every one of these conversations, and your depiction of this as a set of decisions that are not to be justified but lamented is one of those. I think that's something I'm going to carry with me through this crisis. Let's continue to set aside politics a little bit, and even the coronavirus and what we're facing right now. Where in this damaged world do you think that Bonhoeffer would turn his attention at this moment in history?
Certainly to the appreciation of community. He wrote his first dissertation at age 21, which one philosopher called nothing short of a miracle. And his second dissertation at 23, by the way, in Germany in the 1930s. Can you imagine? But anyway, 1920s rather. So he would go to community, and I think in the fact that we're separated from one another helps us to appreciate our longing and need for community in a way we can't know it when we're in proximity with each other. I miss you, Jack, in a way I don't normally miss you, because I know you're accessible, but you're inaccessible to me in terms of physical proximity. I miss you more now than I do normally. And
the irony is we're about a mile apart from each other as we're having this conversation, but there's nothing we can do about that.
Exactly, and I feel it, and so I have an appreciation for you that is deeper and greater than it normally would be, and I'm learning to appreciate that, to assign a value to that, but also Bonhoeffer, apropos to this, warns us that when we idealize community, we end up valuing that imagination more than we do what the reality of community, the real benefit of community. So we have to be careful we don't romanticize it and keep it real. So he helps us to do that. Read his first dissertation, Sanctorum Communio, the communion of the saints. You'll get the point.
It's interesting. We were sort of talking about this before we went live on Facebook for our viewers and listeners, that there's a different kind of hunger for people getting together now in ways they didn't imagine than there was before this crisis hit. I'm going to ask you about your pastor in a minute, but I know that our Seder, as I've said, is both the smallest and the largest that I have ever conducted. Two of us at the table and 100 or more on Zoom joining in, friends, family, and a lot of people who are strangers. And people are just desperate to have contact on these important moments. Tell me about the Easter basket you got from your church.
Right. Yeah, even though I'm an ordained minister, I don't serve a congregation. So in many ways, I function with a local congregation the way a layperson would. And so the rector of our evangelical Anglican congregation actually went out, I think others did as well, and paid delivery visit, only delivery, to each congregant, delivering a package that contained all the necessary elements for observing everything from Palm Sunday to Easter Sunday, including Holy Communion, which will be celebrated virtually. We will watch that, and then we will have consecrated bread and wine to actually partake of ourselves. I'm at a little advantage being ordained. It covers some spaces that lay people wouldn't have.
Right.
Regardless, we're all invited and all able to participate because of a little paper lunch bag that we each received, which was very generous.
I think that's wonderful. It's just wonderful. Easter in a box.
Yeah.
There's Seder in a box too. We have those things going out. So this day that we're having this conversation, people will be watching this episode other than live on Facebook. But this day in particular, Rob, is a sort of an anniversary for us. The night of the first Seder 3 years ago, you were a guest at my table. We were relatively new acquaintances at that point, and we found a bond through the experience itself and through stories we shared with each other that has cemented a friendship here. You have moved through Judaism and Christianity as both a scholar and a pilgrim. And I'm wondering what that journey leads you to offer as a lesson to people who are watching and listening now.
Well, certainly the importance of a table, virtual or in reality. Your table was enormously important in my own spiritual pilgrimage. In many ways, it was a return home for me in so many ways, because of course, my first visit to you took place during a Holy Week, the time between Palm Sunday and Easter Sunday.
Right.
And of course, as you alluded to, I have a Jewish history, and really, well, it's complicated. My father born Jewish, my mother converted to Judaism to marry my father. We were given freedom to pursue whatever religious path we wanted. The kids ended up Christian. That's a story we don't have time for, only
Right.
to say all that.
Read the book.
Read the book. There is a book, Costly Grace, An Evangelical Minister's Rediscovery of Faith, Hope, and Love, HarperCollins. And you'll read the story of the rabbi's table. Very important part of that story, but it was at your table. And for a Christian, we refer to communion as the table. And I'm grateful to be part of a church that practices an open table. All are welcome at that table. And that has profound meaning to me. So the fact that the table is adjusted in this virtual time, which, by the way, I got to say, isn't Anne delighted that she doesn't have to prepare food for those 100 participants?
That's a different conversation.
That's a lot of people to feed. So you can feed them virtually tonight, again, at your table. So tables, and maybe when we come out of this period of isolation, we'll assign greater value to those tables that we share with each other.
That's a great message.
When you and I sit at a breakfast table, as we sometimes do,
yep,
that table is going to be more important to me than ever.
Well, the last question I ask my partners in conversation before we conclude is, what can you offer to people watching or listening at home to inspire them and engage them at this time when they might be overwhelmed by the virus?
You know, I think for me, and I'll just share this as a helpful contribution here, instead of spending most of my time thinking about what I'm missing, I'm thinking a lot about what I'm gaining. For example, the study of faces in a way I never have in my life. Being on Zoom, being on Facebook Live, being on FaceTime, other video platforms, I'm able to see your face, Jack, right now, and your eyes and your smile. And in a way, I never do. I mean, I wouldn't sit and study you. You might think, you might get suspicious if I did, but I wouldn't normally do it. It's not a normal thing we would do, but video allows us to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm seeing people's faces in a way I've never seen them before. And I've found that just a very delightful and satisfying exercise. And it helps me to appreciate people in a way I normally cannot.
That's wonderful. It's wonderful. Rob Schenck, before we go, tell people how they can find out more about the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Institute.
Really easy, especially these days, tdbi.org, or find us on Facebook at Dietrich Bonhoeffer Institute.
Sounds great. Rob Schenck, thanks for being with us. And to those of you watching us at home, listening to this podcast, webcast, please stay home, stay focused, and of course, stay well.